The silence of deep space shattered like brittle glass when the first long-range sensors detected the incoming Zorn fleet. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood motionless, her reflection ghosting against the massive holographic display that dominated the Global Defense Initiative's central command center. Streams of data cascaded around her like digital waterfalls, each line of code telling a story more terrifying than the last. Outside the reinforced windows, the early morning light of Cape Canaveral painted the sky in muted oranges and grays. Monitors flickered with incoming transmissions, each one adding another piece to an increasingly complex puzzle. The Zorn ships were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, massive crystalline structures that seemed to defy the basic principles of spacecraft design. "Confirm visual," muttered Commander Michael Chen, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the central console. Years of military service had etched lines of tension into his face, but today those lines seemed deeper, more pronounced. Elena's fingers danced across her own terminal, filtering and analyzing data streams that others would dismiss as mere background noise. Where her colleagues saw random signals, she perceived patterns, intricate, almost musical rhythms hidden within the chaos of alien communication. "They're not just approaching," she said softly, her voice cutting through the mounting tension in the room. "They're signaling, constantly." The other researchers exchanged glances. Dr. Aisha Kapoor, a quantum communication specialist, moved closer to Elena's display. "That's impossible," she challenged. "Those aren't standard communication protocols. They're too complex, too organic," Elena finished for her. The holographic representation of the incoming fleet shifted, its crystalline structures seemingly breathing with an almost living quality. Each ship appeared connected, not just through technological means, but through something more fundamental. The collective consciousness that defied traditional understanding of spacecraft and intelligence. Satellite tracking systems began to fail one by one, not from any external interference, but as if the very information about the Zorn fleet was becoming unstable. Digital records flickered and distorted, creating gaps in their approach trajectory that should have been mathematically impossible. "We're losing tracking," announced a young technician, panic rising in his voice. "They're not following any known approach vector." Elena's mind raced. The Zorn weren't just traveling through space, they were rewriting the very rules of spatial navigation. Each moment of their approach revealed layers of complexity that human science had only dreamed about. Commander Chen turned to her, years of military training battling against the growing sense of unknown. "Rodriguez, what are we looking at?" She took a deep breath, knowing her next words would challenge everything they understood about first contact. "It's not just a fleet. It's a living system. Each ship is a cell in a massive interconnected organism. They're communicating constantly, but not like we understand communication." The room fell silent. Outside, the first rays of sunlight caught the edge of a massive display screen, momentarily transforming the technological marvel into a canvas of gold and silver. In that instant, the scale of what they were facing became brutally clear. This was more than an invasion. This was a fundamental challenge to humanity's understanding of intelligence, of existence itself. Elena's mind was already working, peeling back layers of alien signal patterns. Something was hidden in their approach, a rhythm, a message that lay just beyond current human comprehension. Years of research into complex communication systems, her groundbreaking work on adaptive information networks, had prepared her for this moment. The Zorn weren't just coming to Earth, they were sending a message, and Elena Rodriguez was determined to be the first human to truly understand it. As the first massive crystalline ships began to eclipse the sun, casting enormous shadows across the Florida coastline, humanity held its collective breath. The moment of first contact had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again. The first wave hit with surgical precision. Zorn weaponry transformed entire military installations into molten landscapes of destruction. Electromagnetic pulses ripped through communication networks, turning sophisticated defense systems into useless hunks of metal and circuitry. In the Global Defense Initiative's backup facility, a reinforced underground complex carved deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the initial assault with an intensity that bordered on scientific detachment. Screens around her displayed a catastrophic landscape. Military bases vanishing in moments, communication satellites exploding in silent, brilliant bursts of light. "We're losing ground," Commander Chen muttered, his fingers tracing impossible evacuation routes on a holographic map. Dots representing human military units winked out with terrifying speed. Elena's attention remained fixed on the data streams. While others saw only destruction, she saw patterns. The Zorn weren't just attacking. They were probing, testing, gathering information with each calculated strike. "They're mapping our response systems," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the controlled chaos of the command center. "Each attack is a question. They're learning how we think, how we respond to threat." Dr. Aisha Kapoor approached, her usual calm demeanor replaced by a sharp edge of professional concern. "That's impossible. No military force could process information that quickly." A series of explosions lit up the underground facility's monitoring screens. The western seaboard of the United States was being systematically dismantled, military installations vanishing like sandcastles before an impossible tide. Elena's fingers flew across her interface, pulling apart the alien communication patterns. Something was off. The precision of the attack, its mathematical perfection, held a subtle irregularity that most would miss. "Look at the timing," she said, pulling up a complex series of graphs. "It's not random. There's a rhythm to their assault, a pattern that repeats with microscopic variations." Commander Chen leaned in, decades of military experience fighting against the growing sense of incomprehension. The Zorn weren't just destroying. They were communicating through destruction. Satellite imagery showed entire cities going dark. Military response teams were being systematically neutralized before they could even mount a defense. It was as if the aliens knew every potential human counter-strategy before it could be implemented. "They're reading our playbook," muttered a junior communications officer, her voice a mixture of terror and professional frustration. "How is that even possible?" Elena's mind raced. The attack wasn't just about physical destruction. It was an information-gathering mission of unprecedented scale. Each destroyed communication array, each fallen defense system was a data point in the most comprehensive intelligence-gathering operation in human history. "We're not just under attack," she said, her voice gaining a strange calm. "We're being studied." The backup facility buzzed with a mixture of terror and professional determination. Military strategists worked frantically, trying to identify any weakness in the alien approach. But Elena saw something different. Where others saw an unstoppable invasion, she saw a complex system with inherent vulnerabilities. The Zorn's greatest strength, their ability to process information with machine-like precision, was also potentially their greatest weakness. No system is perfect. No collective intelligence is without blind spots. A massive explosion rocked the underground facility. Dust filtered through carefully designed ventilation systems. Outside, the world was being rewritten in fire and electromagnetic destruction. Commander Chen turned to Elena, years of military training battling against the growing sense of helplessness. "Rodriguez, we need options. Now." She looked up, a strange light in her eyes. The Zorn thought they were gathering information. They thought they were dismantling human defenses, but they were giving Elena exactly what she needed: a complete picture of their computational approach. "We're going to fight," Elena said quietly, "but not with weapons. We're going to fight with something they won't expect." As another wave of destruction painted the world in shades of fire and dissolution, Dr. Elena Rodriguez began to assemble the most unconventional defense team in human history. The first battle was lost, but the war was just beginning. And humanity was about to show the Zorn that information is the most powerful weapon of all. The underground facility hummed with an energy that defied the destruction happening above ground. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before a collection of humanity's most brilliant minds, a team unlike any assembled in human history. Dr. Marcus Reyes, a cognitive linguist with a reputation for decoding the most complex communication systems, sat next to Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a quantum psychologist whose work on collective intelligence had been dismissed as theoretical madness just years before. Beside them, Professor Ibrahim Al-Khalid adjusted his glasses, his expertise in game theory and computational complexity casting a sharp intellectual edge to the group. "We're not going to fight the Zorn," Elena began, her voice cutting through the tension. "We're going to communicate with them in a way they've never experienced." The room fell silent. Outside, the world continued to burn. But here, in this moment, something extraordinary was taking shape. Dr. Tanaka leaned forward, her eyes bright with intellectual excitement. Their collective consciousness is their greatest strength and their most significant vulnerability. They process information as a unified system, which means they have no concept of individual unpredictability. Marcus Reyes pulled up a complex linguistic diagram. "Look at their communication patterns. They're not just transmitting information. They're creating a constant, mathematically precise dialogue. Every signal is a perfect response. Every communication a predictable exchange." Elena nodded. The team she'd assembled represented disciplines that had never truly worked together before. A cognitive linguist, a quantum psychologist, a game theorist, a complex systems analyst, a neurological communication expert. Each brought a unique perspective to the most critical challenge humanity had ever faced. "We need to create something that breaks their fundamental understanding of communication," Professor Al-Khalid explained, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface. "A message that isn't a message. A communication that defies their entire conceptual framework." The gravity of their task hung in the air. While military forces continued to fight a losing battle against the Zorn, this team was preparing a weapon far more sophisticated than any missile or defensive system. Dr. Sofia Martinez, a neurological communication specialist, spread out a series of complex diagrams. Their collective consciousness processes information like a perfect machine. But machines have blind spots, paradoxes, logical inconsistencies that can create cascading system failures. Each team member began to contribute pieces of an impossible puzzle. Marcus started mapping linguistic patterns that could introduce cognitive dissonance. Yuki developed quantum communication models that existed in multiple potential states simultaneously. Ibrahim constructed game theory scenarios that defied traditional logical processing. "We're not just going to send a message," Elena said, her voice gaining momentum. "We're going to send a living, evolving communication that changes the moment it's perceived, something that cannot be fully processed or understood." The team worked with a fury that ignored the destruction happening above ground. Massive screens display the ongoing Zorn invasion, a constant reminder of the stakes. But here, in this moment, humanity was preparing its most sophisticated defense. Dr. Rice pulled up a complex linguistic model. "Imagine a language that rewrites itself the moment it's understood. A communication that is simultaneously a question, an answer, and a complete contradiction." Professor Al-Khalid added mathematical complexity to the evolving model. "We're creating an intellectual virus, something that will force their collective consciousness to confront concepts it cannot process." Elena watched the team work, seeing something magnificent taking shape. This was more than a defense strategy. This was a fundamental challenge to the nature of communication itself. "The Zorn believe they understand everything," she said quietly. "We're going to show them that understanding is far more complex than they ever imagined." As the team worked, the first prototype of their impossible communication began to take shape. A message that was not a message. A communication that existed in a state of constant transformation. Humanity's most powerful weapon was about to be unleashed, and it would be nothing like the Zorn could ever expect. The first transmission went out like a whisper, then a scream, then something entirely impossible to define. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched as complex algorithms she barely understood transformed into a communication that existed in multiple states simultaneously. Quantum communication arrays across the planet synchronized, broadcasting a message that was less a traditional signal and more a living, breathing intellectual construct. The Zorn fleet, mid-invasion, suddenly hesitated. Dr. Marcus Reyes leaned forward, his eyes tracking minute changes in the alien communication patterns. "It's working," he whispered. "They're trying to process something that cannot be processed." The transmission was a masterpiece of intellectual warfare. Linguistic patterns shifted and rewrote themselves in real time. Mathematical theorems folded into philosophical paradoxes. Each moment of the communication existed as both a question and an answer, a statement and its own contradiction. Dr. Yuki Tanaka monitored the quantum interfaces, her fingers dancing across holographic displays. "Look at their collective response," she said. "They're experiencing something beyond their computational framework." Zorn ships began to drift, not from any physical interference, but from a fundamental disruption of their collective thought process. Where once they moved with perfect synchronization, now they showed signs of internal conflict. "We're introducing cognitive dissonance at a systemic level," Professor Ibrahim Al-Khalid explained, watching the complex data streams. "Each transmission is a logical trap that cannot be resolved within their existing computational framework." The communication was beautiful in its complexity. It challenged the very nature of information itself. Linguistic structures that emerged and dissolved simultaneously. Mathematical equations that solved and unsolved themselves in the same moment. Philosophical concepts that existed in multiple contradictory states. Elena understood something profound was happening. This wasn't just a defensive strategy. They were fundamentally challenging the Zorn's understanding of intelligence, of communication, of existence itself. Satellite monitoring stations around the world captured the extraordinary event. Zorn ships began to show signs of internal breakdown. Their perfect collective consciousness was experiencing something it could not comprehend. True unpredictability. They rely on perfect information processing, Dr. Sofia Martinez noted, her voice a mixture of scientific excitement and professional concentration. "We're giving them something that defies the concept of perfect processing." The transmission continued, a living thing that evolved with each moment. It was simultaneously a message, a weapon, and a fundamental challenge to the Zorn's entire conceptual understanding. Military commanders watched in disbelief. The ships that had been systematically destroying human infrastructure now moved erratically. Some turned against others. Some simply stopped, suspended in space like confused children. Dr. Reyes pulled up a complex linguistic diagram. "We're not just communicating," he said. "We're forcing them to confront the limits of their own understanding." Elena watched the data streams, seeing something extraordinary unfold. The Zorn's greatest strength, their ability to process information with machine-like precision, was becoming their most significant weakness. The quantum communication arrays continued their impossible transmission. Each moment introduced new layers of complexity. Philosophical concepts became mathematical theorems. Mathematical theorems dissolved into linguistic paradoxes. The entire transmission was a living, breathing intellectual construct that defied traditional understanding. "They cannot resolve this," Professor Al-Khalid said quietly. "We're presenting them with a communication that exists outside their entire conceptual framework." Zorn ships began to separate. Their once perfect collective movement became a chaotic dance of confusion and internal conflict. Each ship was trying to process an impossible communication, a message that could not be understood, only experienced. Elena understood they had created something remarkable. Not just a defensive strategy, but a fundamental challenge to the nature of communication itself. The first battle was being won not with weapons, but with pure intellectual creativity. Humanity was showing the Zorn that true intelligence is about more than processing power. It's about the capacity to imagine the unimaginable. The breakthrough came at 3:47 Universal Time. Dr. Elena Rodriguez discovered the fundamental architecture of the Zorn's neural network, a crystalline computational system that was both more and less than any human had ever imagined. "It's not just a network," she explained to her team, holographic displays dancing with impossible geometric patterns. It's a living, breathing computational organism. Each ship is a neuron in a massive, galaxy-spanning brain. Dr. Yuki Tanaka approached the display, her eyes wide with scientific wonder. The Zorn's computational system was elegant in its complexity. A perfect, mathematically precise collective consciousness that had never encountered a truly unpredictable input. Professor Ibrahim Al-Khalid began mapping the network's vulnerabilities. Their strength is their absolute unity, he said. But unity requires predictability, and predictability is a weakness waiting to be exploited. Elena's team worked with a fury that ignored the destruction happening beyond their reinforced facility. Massive screens display the ongoing Zorn invasion. But here, in this moment, humanity was preparing its most sophisticated intellectual assault. The neural network they were analyzing was unlike anything in human scientific understanding. It existed simultaneously as a communication system, a computational matrix, and a living organism. Each crystalline ship was more than a vessel. It was a thought, a memory, a potential response. "We're not just going to disrupt their communication," Elena said, her voice gaining an almost prophetic intensity. "We're going to introduce a fundamental paradox into their entire existential framework." Dr. Marcus Rice pulled up complex linguistic models that dissolved and reformed with each moment. "Their communication is a perfect mathematical equation," he explained. "But no equation is truly perfect. There are always variables, always unexpected inputs." The team began constructing what would become known as the Cognitive Dissolution Protocol. It was less a weapon and more a philosophical virus, a series of recursive algorithms designed to create systemic uncertainty. Dr. Sophia Martinez demonstrated the initial prototype. "Watch how it works," she said, bringing up a complex holographic representation. Each transmission creates a logical loop that cannot be resolved within their existing computational framework. The algorithm was beautiful in its complexity. It introduced mathematical theorems that solved and unsolved themselves simultaneously, linguistic patterns that existed in multiple contradictory states, philosophical concepts that challenged the very nature of collective consciousness. "They believe information can be perfectly processed," Elena explained. "We're going to show them the beauty of uncertainty." Hours passed. The team worked with a concentration that bordered on religious devotion. Outside, the world continued to burn. But here, in this moment, humanity was preparing its most sophisticated defense. Professor Al-Khalid refined the mathematical models. Dr. Rice developed linguistic patterns that could not be fully comprehended. Dr. Tanaka explored quantum communication states that existed beyond traditional understanding. "Their neural network assumes absolute knowledge," Yuki said quietly. "We're going to introduce the concept of fundamental uncertainty." The Cognitive Dissolution Protocol took shape, a transmission that was simultaneously a question, an answer, and a complete contradiction. It challenged the Zorn's entire understanding of communication, of existence, of intelligence itself. Elena watched the final algorithm take shape. This was more than a defensive strategy. This was a fundamental challenge to the nature of collective consciousness. "The Zorn believe they understand everything," she said, her voice filled with a strange mixture of scientific precision and human creativity. "We're going to show them that understanding is far more complex than they ever imagined." As the final lines of code were written, something extraordinary began to happen. The algorithm was no longer just a human creation. It had become something alive, something that existed beyond traditional computational understanding. Humanity's most powerful weapon was ready, and it was nothing like the Zorn could ever expect. The Zorn fleet began to disintegrate in ways no one could have predicted. What had been a perfectly synchronized collective became a chaotic constellation of conflicting impulses. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the holographic displays with an intensity that bordered on scientific rapture. Each Zorn ship was now experiencing a complete breakdown of its collective consciousness, a systemic failure that transformed their greatest strength into an insurmountable weakness. "They're fragmenting," Dr. Yuki Tanaka said, her voice a mixture of awe and professional fascination. Each ship is becoming an individual entity, unable to reconcile the paradoxes we introduced. The cognitive dissolution protocol worked like an intellectual cancer, spreading through the Zorn's neural network with devastating precision. Some ships turned on others. Some drifted aimlessly. Some appeared to be caught in impossible logical loops, their movements a physical manifestation of computational confusion. Commander Michael Chen approached the monitoring station, decades of military experience failing to prepare him for what he was witnessing. "Rodriguez," he said, "explain what's happening to me in a way I can understand." Elena smiled, a rare moment of human emotion breaking through her scientific concentration. "Imagine a perfect machine that suddenly discovers it can ask questions about its own existence," she explained. "We've introduced a virus of self-awareness into a system that never conceived of individual thought." The quantum communication arrays continued their impossible transmission. Each moment introduced new layers of complexity that the Zorn simply could not process. Mathematical theorems dissolved into linguistic paradoxes. Philosophical concepts became computational challenges. Professor Ibrahim Al-Khalid tracked the dissolution with mathematical precision. "Look at how their collective movement is breaking down," he said. "Each ship is now processing information differently, individually, unpredictably." Massive Zorn vessels that had once moved with perfect synchronization now engaged in what could only be described as an intellectual civil war. Some ships attempted to maintain the original collective approach. Others rebelled, their newly discovered individuality creating impossible conflicts. "We've given them something they never had," Dr. Marcus Reyes observed. "The capacity for individual interpretation." The scientific team watched in awe. This was more than a military victory. This was a fundamental transformation of an entire alien civilization's understanding of consciousness. Satellite monitoring stations around the world captured the extraordinary event. The Zorn fleet, once a perfect, synchronized force, now moved like a collection of confused children, each ship struggling to understand its newfound individuality. Their collective consciousness is experiencing something impossible, Dr. Sofia Martinez noted. True uncertainty. The possibility of being wrong. Elena understood the profound nature of what was happening. They weren't just defending Earth. They were introducing the most revolutionary concept in the universe, the beauty of individual thought. The dissolution spread rapidly. Zorn communication channels filled with impossible contradictions. Ships that had moved as a single entity now argued with themselves, each struggling to resolve the intellectual paradoxes introduced by the human transmission. "They're learning what it means to think independently," Elena said quietly. "To question. To doubt." Commander Chen watched the displays, understanding something fundamental was happening. This was a victory achieved not through destruction, but through the most powerful force in the universe, ideas. The Zorn fleet continued to fragment. Some ships began to shut down completely. Others moved in erratic patterns that defied their previous computational precision. Each vessel was now experiencing a complete existential crisis. "We've given them the most dangerous gift," Professor Al-Khalid said. "The ability to ask why." As the hours passed, the Zorn collective consciousness continued to dissolve. What had been a perfect, synchronized invasion force was now a collection of individual entities, each struggling to understand its own existence. Humanity had discovered its most powerful weapon. Not a missile, not a defensive system, but the capacity to introduce doubt, to challenge, to make something perfect realize its own imperfection. The first true battle was being won, and it was a battle of pure intellectual creativity. The final confrontation arrived with a silence more profound than any battle cry. Remaining Zorn leadership attempted their last desperate assault, but their once perfect collective had become a battlefield of conflicting thoughts and impossible contradictions. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood in the Global Defense Initiative's Central Command, her team surrounding her like intellectual warriors. Commander Michael Chen watched the holographic displays, decades of military experience struggling to comprehend the unprecedented conflict unfolding before them. They're trying to reassemble their collective consciousness, Dr. Yuki Tanaka observed, her fingers tracing the chaotic movement of the Zorn fleet. But it's like trying to rebuild a shattered mirror. Each piece reflects a different reality. The Zorn's final assault was nothing like their initial invasion, where once they moved with mathematical precision, now their ships moved in patterns that defied logical understanding. Some ships attacked their own fleet. Others broadcast impossible mathematical theorems. Some simply drifted, engaged in what appeared to be internal philosophical debates. Professor Ibrahim Al-Khalid tracked the dissolution with mathematical precision. Their collective intelligence is experiencing a complete existential breakdown, he explained. Each ship is now an individual entity, struggling to understand its own existence. Elena watched the displays, understanding the profound nature of what was happening. They had introduced something more devastating than any weapon, the concept of individual thought. Dr. Marcus Reyes pulled up complex communication patterns. Listen to their transmissions, he said. They're no longer a unified voice. They're arguing, questioning, doubting. The Zorn leadership ships attempted to coordinate a final assault, but their communication had become a cacophony of conflicting impulses. Some ships advocated retreat, others demanded continued attack. Some simply broadcast philosophical questions about the nature of their existence. We've given them the most dangerous gift, Elena said quietly, the ability to ask why. Commander Chen watched in disbelief as the most sophisticated invasion force in galactic history tore itself apart, not through external destruction, but through an internal intellectual revolution. Dr. Sofia Martinez tracked the psychological dissolution. Their collective consciousness is experiencing something it was never designed to handle, she explained. True individual thought, the possibility of being wrong. The battle, if it could be called a battle, was unlike any conflict in human history. The Zorn ships moved in patterns that defied traditional understanding of military engagement. Some ships broadcast complex mathematical proofs. Others engaged in what appeared to be philosophical debates with themselves. They're learning what it means to think, Elena said, her voice a mixture of scientific observation and something deeper, to question, to doubt. The quantum communication arrays continued their impossible transmission. Each moment introduced new layers of complexity that the Zorn leadership could not resolve. Mathematical theorems dissolved into linguistic paradoxes. Philosophical concepts became computational challenges. Massive Zorn vessels that had once moved with perfect synchronization now looked like a collection of confused entities, each struggling to understand its newfound individuality. "We've introduced a virus of self-awareness," Professor Al-Khalid observed. "They're experiencing the most profound transformation possible." The final moments of the confrontation were almost anticlimactic. The Zorn fleet, once a perfect, synchronized force of galactic conquest, now moved like a collection of confused children, each ship struggling to understand its own existence. Elena understood the profound nature of their victory. They hadn't destroyed the Zorn. They had liberated them. Commander Chen approached her, his voice quiet. "What happens now?" "Now," Elena said, watching the dissolving Zorn fleet, "they learn what it means to be truly intelligent, to question, to doubt, to imagine." The last Zorn ships drifted into silence, not defeated, not destroyed, but fundamentally transformed. Humanity had discovered its most powerful weapon, not a missile, not a defensive system, but the capacity to introduce doubt, to challenge, to make something perfect realize its own imperfection. The first true battle was won, and it was a battle of pure intellectual creativity. The aftermath of the conflict was unlike any first contact scenario in human history. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before the United Nations Special Assembly, her presentation revealing a transformation that would reshape humanity's understanding of intelligence, communication, and cosmic potential. "We didn't defeat the Zorn," she explained, her voice calm and precise. We communicated with them in a way no civilization had ever attempted before. Holographic displays showed the remnants of the Zorn fleet, no longer a unified collective, but a collection of individual entities struggling to understand their newfound consciousness. Scientists from around the world studied the extraordinary results of humanity's most unprecedented intellectual victory. Dr. Yuki Tanaka presented the initial findings. The Zorn's collective consciousness was a single, perfect computational system, she explained. We introduced the concept of individual thought, of uncertainty, of doubt. Professor Ibrahim Al-Khalid added mathematical precision to the explanation. Our cognitive dissolution protocol didn't destroy them. It evolved them. We gave them the most powerful tool in the universe, the ability to question. The global response was a mixture of celebration and profound scientific wonder. Humanity had not just defended itself. It had fundamentally transformed an alien civilization through pure intellectual creativity. Commander Michael Chen, now serving as a bridge between military strategy and scientific exploration, reviewed the comprehensive reports. The Zorn ships that once threatened total destruction now drifted in a state of intellectual awakening. Some broadcast complex philosophical questions. Others explored mathematical theorems that challenged their previous understanding of existence. They're learning, Alina said quietly. Really learning. The diplomatic implications were extraordinary. The Zorn were no longer a unified threat. They were becoming something entirely new. A collection of individual entities discovering the beauty of independent thought. Dr. Marcus Reyes tracked the ongoing communication patterns. Look at how they're communicating now, he said. No longer a perfect, synchronized transmission. Now it's a conversation. A dialogue. Global research teams began carefully studying the transformed Zorn technology. Each crystalline ship was now a treasure trove of scientific discovery, a living testament to the power of intellectual transformation. We didn't use weapons, Alina explained to the assembled scientists. We used the most powerful force in the universe, ideas, the capacity to question, to imagine. The Zorn fleet became humanity's greatest scientific opportunity. Each ship was carefully studied, each communication pattern analyzed. They had become something between technology and living consciousness, a bridge between understanding that no one had ever anticipated. Dr. Sofia Martinez led the psychological analysis. They're experiencing something profound, she reported. The discovery of individual thought, the realization that certainty is an illusion. International teams work to establish communication, not as conquerors, not as defenders, but as fellow explorers of consciousness. Professor Al-Khalid summarized the fundamental breakthrough. Intelligence is not about perfect processing, he explained. It's about the capacity to question, to doubt, to imagine beyond current understanding. The Zorn ships that remained began to show extraordinary developments. Some developed unique communication patterns. Others explored scientific and philosophical concepts that challenged their previous collective understanding. Alina understood the profound nature of what had happened. They hadn't just defended Earth. They had introduced a new concept of intelligence to a galactic civilization. We showed them the most dangerous and beautiful thing possible, she said during her final report. The ability to ask why. World leaders struggle to comprehend the full implications. This was more than a first contact scenario. This was a fundamental reimagining of what intelligence could be. The Zorn fleet, once a perfect, synchronized force of galactic conquest, was now a collection of emerging individual consciousnesses, each ship a universe of potential, each transmission a step toward a new understanding. Humanity had discovered its most powerful capability. Not through military might, not through technological superiority, but through the capacity to introduce doubt, to challenge, to make something perfect realize its own imperfection. As the first reports of Zorn ships beginning to explore, to question, to imagine began to come in, humanity realized something profound. The greatest victory was not in defeating an enemy. It was in helping another civilization discover the true meaning of intelligence.